Welcome everyone to another episode of the Discover New Music podcast from Pelt Music, where we talk with artists that we have featured on our Discover New Music playlist over on Spotify. One such artist is Guise, and we'll be chatting with them very shortly about their upcoming debut album, Youngest Daughter. But before then, the usual reminders from myself, if you would please do follow us on social media. We are on Facebook at Pelt and on Twitter and Instagram at Pelt Music. And if you would, please do hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, wherever you are watching or listening. Welcome, Jess, to the Discover New Music podcast. We're delighted to have you on. How are you this fine sunny day?
Good, I'm lovely. I've been out weeding my garden, which is one of my most favourite things to do. So yeah, that was good. It's always good for the soul. Otherwise, very busy with the record coming out and all the other things going on in life. So yeah, busy but good. I'm just grateful that spring has sprung.
Yeah, definitely. And a good busy, like you said, because you've got some exciting things coming up. So we're going to talk about your upcoming album, and we're going to talk about the live shows you've got coming up. But the Discover New Music podcast is all about our listeners discovering new music, bands, artists that perhaps they haven't listened to before. So we've featured a couple of your tracks over on our Discover New Music playlist on Spotify. So we're going to ask you about those two songs in just a second, but we start every podcast with the same question. And it's what we call the origin story. So, of course, Jess, you are the front person for the band Guise. How did that band come into being? What is the origin story for Guise?
Well, so we are like the slowest band in the world, essentially. So I have been writing songs since I was 15, maybe 14, since I was a kid. But it's terrifying. Like, it's completely terrifying to share stuff that you've written with the world of any kind. But particularly, I found sharing songs really scary for a long time. And I met Titus, my bassist, and Laura, who I sing with, and she's playing keys these days as well. We all met at university. And Laura and I we were all in theatre. Laura and I were in a really bizarre musical. It was like a self-help musical. It was very, very odd, and I mean terrible. But we had a duet in it, and I remember thinking, "Oh, that sounds nice." And I didn't do musicals because I was generally terrified of singing in public, in general, at that point. But the director is still a good friend, and she sort of coerced me into it. And I remember thinking, oh, we sound quite nice together, and always thinking that Laura was an extraordinary singer. And then Titus I met doing another play in which he was directing me, and he basically tortured me. It was horrible, but we got on really well. It was like method acting, but we were both, 19, 20 students. We didn't know what we were doing, so it was awful, but we made really good friends. And he discovered that I wrote songs, and one day kind of forced me to play him some. And then he said, "You're an idiot. Like, you should be doing something with these. They're really good." And I think specifically what he said is loads of people with songs that are much worse do things with them. And I was like, that is true. That's fair. I'm not sure that I need to get my confidence that way, but I do remember it helped. So he sort of coerced me into thinking about it a bit more seriously. And then I thought I wasn't brave enough to do it on my own. So I thought, well, maybe Laura would like to sing with me. So I played her some songs. She also, I still remember our first rehearsal really vividly. She just sort of connected with it immediately, and is still, I think, the biggest fan of some of my songs out there. So I had these two enthusiasts for my songs, which was absolutely crucial for me personally to feel brave enough to do it. But we all worked in theatre, so we went off from university and all worked in theatre. So the number of times where we were all available to do gigs or indeed anything were very, very few and far between for years and years and years. Like, if I was in a show, I was in shows for years, 6-7 days a week. You just can't really gig.
No.
So it was very slow. And we found Keith, our drummer, we found him quite a lot later through a friend of Titus's, Eve, who's his missus, who was like, "Oh, my boyfriend's a drummer." And we played him the stuff, and he didn't hate it, so that was good, and he joined. But then it's sort of, it's been off and on and really, really slow until March 2020.
Yes.
I know. So at this point, I mean, there were other things as well, in that I married into sort of Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He's not in the Hall of Fame, but I married an established musician, which showed me quite a lot about the world and life of musicians, but also terrified me again. So basically the reason this is a really long birthing story. So the reason it's been so long is because I'm a coward and it's really scary. But eventually my husband was like, you should take this more seriously. And I was thinking about not acting anymore just because it was getting in the way of every other thing I wanted to do in my life and all my other dreams. And I wanted to train as a psychologist, which I'm now doing as well. And so I did that sort of towards the end of 2019. I decided to take that step. And then I was like, right, 2020, that's the year. And so we sort of gave it this big impetus at that point and put our first proper EP together, and Extra Mile, who are very dear people to us, they put the record out, and then the world ended. So
Yeah.
so it's like we'd taken bloody long enough already, and then the pandemic struck. So yeah, so that didn't really help with it. Well, in some ways it did, I suppose, help with the impetus, but yeah.
Yeah, well, as you say, it is a lengthy story, but it's an honest story, which is really nice. You know, it is really nice to hear. And obviously, I have to agree with Titus when you said, you know, this music's too good to be sat around. It needs to be out there. So we've featured 2 of those songs on our Discover New Music playlist. So we'll talk to you about both songs. First one I'm going to talk to you about is Don't Come Back. Which is a great upbeat little number that is a bit of an earworm, one that will stick with you.
That's the idea.
So well, talk to us then about Don't Come Back. How was the song formed? You know, what is it about?
So Don't Come Back is sort of I wrote it. I still remember writing it. I wrote it in the living room. I used to live with Laura. I wrote it in the living room. I was just cross, I think, that there'd been another failed relationship, but we were still messing around and just damaging each other and hurting each other left, right, and centre, and other people. And there had been kind of, London is a really, I don't know, are you London based?
Not too far away. Not too far away.
Yeah. So London for me is like, it's not my natural habitat at all. And I found some people love this about it, but I find the anonymity of the city really unpleasant in that you can just sort of disappear and there's no accountability, and you just bounce off. You do something awful, then you bounce off, and I'm including myself in that. I did that too, and that's kind of what the song's about. It's just about living in London and treating people kind of terribly and there being no consequences at all, but also myself making really bad decisions. So it's not about one person per se. There's little bits of several different romantic disasters in that song, but it is essentially an autobiographical tale of romantic woes, as indeed quite a lot of my songs are. So yeah, that's what that one's about. But it's relatively old. I wrote it quite a long time ago, and I wasn't going to put it on the record because I kind of forgotten about it, because this is the problem when you don't. When I wasn't doing it for such a long time, I was too scared. I wrote all these songs and then wasn't playing them, so I forgot. And then I played it to my producer, who's also my husband, in a session after we'd decided what was on the record. I played him this song, and he was like, "Again, you're an idiot." Like, it's a recurring theme. People call. That
seems to be, yeah.
It's like you've got to put that song on the record. It's great, and it is good fun. It's a bit different to quite a lot of the other stuff that we do. So yeah, on it went, and we got the lovely Lucas Drinkwater to come and play some upright bass on that one, because it just kind of wanted that feeling. And he also did a guitar solo, which is really cool, and there's no chance that I could ever play it live. Yeah, so that's
say we've really enjoyed it, and we also actually enjoyed the video for it, which listeners can check out on YouTube. Where was the inspiration for that video? Where did that come from?
The inspiration for that video was that we have very little time and less money, and we have to be imaginative. And I think, we're not the marketing or the branding of our band is not, it's just us. It's just me and Laura and the sort of people that we are. The songs are very unfiltered. Like that's how I want them to be. They're very honest, and they always have been. So we kind of thought, well, it's a song, it should have had, really, in an ideal world, it would have had a full dance breakdown, because Laura and I are both dancers as well. We both dance, both trained actors. So I kind of wanted it to be that in my head, but we didn't have any budget, so we decided to do the sitting down version, like finger dancing. But it's more, I guess it's just that there's also an element of recalling that period of our lives. We're both actors, me and Laura, and we had to end the self tapes, and it's all that kind of putting yourself up for things and being rejected from it. It's quite a depressing life. Laura's still an actor, but I ran away screaming because it wasn't the one for me. And there's an element of the self-tape about the video, which was also conscious. I don't know if you've ever done a self-tape or seen a self-tape, but they are cringe mostly.
Yeah, definitely.
But visually, it kind of reflects that bit of our life. And it's me and Laura being silly. And again, for many, many years, and the years of that song, that was what our life was like. So there are artistic reasons behind it, but it's also just, it was fun, and it was possible, and it was fun.
Yeah, and listeners should definitely check it out. A very enjoyable video that goes with a very fun song. So yeah, it works really, really well. And you talked about obviously the record as a whole being quite autobiographical, and we'll probably get into that a little bit more in the follow-up question to this. But before we get to that, the next song that we featured on our playlist is "I Know When You Leave," and I think that helps show the eclectic mix of music that is on the record, because it's quite different obviously to the first single we just talked about. But a similar question to Don't Come Back. What can you tell us about I Know When You Leave? When was that song formulated, and how did it come into being?
So that one, you're totally right. We kind of released the two of them, I think, partly because I was hoping people might be intrigued by how different they are. I Know When You Leave is a song, it's a much more recent song. I wrote it about my husband, who tours a lot. So he's away a lot. That's the feature of our lives. Or he used to be away a lot, then he got stuck at home for 2 years, which was terrible. Yeah. It was actually lovely, but it was also terrible. But so we spend a lot of our lives apart, and that's what the song is about a kind of, when you're not with the person, when you're lucky enough to have someone that you share your life with who you really love, and we have won the jackpot there for sure. Eventually, and that's the story of the record is the eventually, I suppose. But we did, I did get very lucky, and it's not like I go about my life perfectly happily when he's not there. Like, everything is good. I'm very I have wonderful friends. I have hobbies and work of my own that I really care about, but it's just, everything's just a little bit worse. There's just something missing. It's not quite the same. For me, it manifests as not feeling quite as present and real. And that's what the song is about. It's about just being aware of the absence, rather than sort of desperately pining and everything being awful, but it's not quite. Do you know what I mean? Nothing's right, nothing's quite right. So that's what the song is about. I actually wrote it in Italy on a tour bus, his tour bus, my partner's tour bus, my husband's tour bus, when I was about to leave him, ironically. Wow. So I was about to go home. But I knew I was about to be at home alone, and that was an experience I had really well. And I wrote, really unusually, I wrote the words first, and then found the tune later, which is not at all how I normally write. There's only 2 songs I think I've ever written that way, both of which are on the record. But I wrote these words on my phone on a bus, and then when I got home, I kind of found this melody, and I'd always just it arrived in my head as something that should be or could be a cappella, and so then I got Laura between Laura and I, we wrote some harmony lines, and then for the recording we ended up with 3 harmony lines, and it became apparent that sounded lovely with just the 2 of us, but it was very obviously not live. You know what I mean? Double vocals. And the wonderful, I'm a massive Emily Barker fan, and I have been for a very long time. I assume you look like you're familiar with her. Yes. Love Emily Barker, and I loved Emily Barker long before I met her. And I love her even more now that I know her, and we're very good friends. And we were doing a live stream. She was doing a live stream with my husband that I had come to, and she said, "Oh, if you want any vocals for the record," and I sort of hyperventilated, and then thought, we do actually have this one line. So Emily sang the top line, and it's basically a 3-part harmony, mostly a cappella with a teeny bit of piano, and it gets quite different to everything else on the record. But again,
and it certainly is different to what's on the record, but it works really, really well. And as you say, Emily's contribution is fantastic to it. And so Let's talk then about the album that you're going to be putting out. So Youngest Daughter is out on April the 29th. It's obviously your debut record. It's autobiographical quite a lot, as we said, and not just recent, but obviously, as you said, the origin story is quite long, and obviously these songs, a lot of these track back quite a while. So
they do.
Talk to us about the album as a whole. What does it feel like to you to be putting your debut album out, and especially with these songs being so autobiographical?
Yeah, it's so strange. It's so wonderful. Like I'm so excited, but also absolutely terrified. But it feels like kind of a coming of age thing for us. So some of the songs, and I haven't, there are some songs, as there should be, that have been dropped by the wayside over the years. It's not. I've gone for the ones that I love most, but there are some songs I wrote 10 years ago. There's a couple that I just love. Like one of my favorite songs on the record is maybe not 10 years old, but 8 years old, and some of them are much, much more recent. But I didn't want to not put them out. And my options are at this stage were basically like, well, either you just do the more recent stuff or you do the best stuff. And that seemed like obviously I would use the best stuff. So it therefore has become like a record that spans this long, checkered and largely ineffectual journey that myself, Laura, Titus, and latterly Keith have been on. To try and make it be a real life thing, this band, against all the other things that we were facing. So it's feels like a coming of age project, which is ridiculous in your 30s, you know what I mean? It's taken a while. In terms of the record, is like there are lots and lots of songs about men on the record, both not just romantically, but there's some men who I never think about anymore, because it's like, but there they are on the songs, and that's weird. That's really odd. But mostly they're about my husband, and then a significant chunk of them are either about or informed by my father, who taught me to play and who is the reason I love music, and who was sort of everything to me. And he passed away very suddenly when I was 18. And so there's a picture of him and I when I was a kid on the inner sleeve of the records of the CD. And I got the records, I got the CDs, not the records, they take ages, but the CDs arrived yesterday, and I opened one and just burst into tears. So it's very, and that's why it's called Youngest Daughter. It's a lyric from one of the songs from Brother in Arms, which we have already put a version out, but I've always had in my head a string arrangement version of that song, which we've got on this record as a sort of bonus track. So that's where the title comes from. So in lots of ways, I mean, the whole thing's dedicated to my dad. It kind of feels like, I got there eventually. I made a record. Here you go. I don't know. I feel like I've not answered that very directly, but
no, you have. No, it's really interesting to get this insight, and obviously your story, the origin story, is quite a unique one to get to this point. And it is obviously a very personal record, and as you say, when you first feel that CD yesterday, I can only imagine what it must have gone through your head with that one. It must obviously have been fantastic.
It's so bananas, and it's some people have been doing it. Most people, when they start writing when they're 15, they make their first record by the time they're 18, and I did record a record at school actually, but no one's ever seeing that. But like, we didn't then. I was just, and it was partly also, to be honest, it was partly because of when my father passed away. Because several years after he died, I couldn't really emotionally handle the concept of playing the guitar, because they were his guitars, for one thing, and I just, so that was another thing that put a bit of a pause on it for me. And I'm really glad, sort of for his sake as well, that I finally got there, but I didn't let that get in the way eventually.
And obviously, as we say, it's a deeply personal record, and uniquely so, because as you've touched upon, the producer of the record is your husband, and that's quite an interesting dynamic to me, because obviously that could work one of two ways. It could either work really, really well or really, really badly. So how was the recording process?
Well, honestly, it was both of those things. It went both. Some days, so my husband Frank is a very well established artist. But yeah, so I think, you know, he is, you know, he does very well, and he's the normal version, and he's abnormal in lots of ways, but he's the normal version in that he started doing it when he was 15 and kept doing it and did it, you know, pursued it. So he's been on the scene and making records since he was 15 years old. Whereas I'm, you know, this is my first baby in this respect. And I'm quite defensive, I think, probably because he's actually he's not intimidating to me because he's my favorite person in the world, but he just knows so much more about what he's doing than I do, and I hate that. And also I think there's an element of, you know, we don't have the same musical direction necessarily. We have different instincts. In places, and as much as I hugely respect and admire and love his musical instincts, it was important to me to stick to mine. But because the thing about working with your husband is, it's, you know, you can be incredibly honest, and there are moments like there's one moment and a song called The Crying Kind, which I wrote for my dad, where I you know, was really hard to get through the recording because both I was crying down the microphone and he was crying down the cans, and we were both just a total mess. And you can very easily access a lot of honesty and be really honest, but at the same time, if you then are honest and touch a nerve, then all the other things like, well, you didn't do that laundry and all that kind of stuff can feed into it. And we're not, you know, we are not people that pull our punches. We are very open with our feelings. So it definitely had and that has moments of being creatively brilliant and moments of causing arguments. So I think it was both. I think we'd do it again. So like I would do it again. You'd have to ask Frank whether
well, I think that's a positive endorsement of the experience. And obviously the experience would have been helped. You mentioned them already. Extra Mile Recordings, we've interviewed a number of their artists, and there's only ever positive feedback towards Extra Mile. How supportive have they been with this album for you?
Yeah, completely. I mean, so they are kind of like family to me, really. Certainly to Frank, they're very, very dear friends. And when we first sent out, when we did the EP and that we released in 2020, and when I first sent it over, and it was really important to me that they didn't feel obliged to do any work with me because of who I'm married to. That was really, really important. So I didn't send it to them at all. Actually, Frank did, and he was like, totally chill if you don't. But they were just immediately on side, and really supportive. And it's not, you know, honestly, musically, it's quite different to a lot of their roster as well. It's not, there's...
they've got a pretty eclectic roster, but
they definitely do. But there's not masses directly like us. And I think they thought that was quite interesting, that it was different. But no, they have been and are and seem to exclusively be incredibly supportive, wonderful people. But yeah, you know, they were all at our wedding. They're not like a label to us. They're but they are also a great label, which is really helpful. Yeah,
and I say that's all I ever hear about them, which is really great in this day and age in particular. So let's shoot back to that EP that you referenced. It's called The Fun Part, and it came out just before that, the world ended, as you say, the pandemic hit. The month we shall all forever remember. So listeners can still check that out online, and they can still buy the EP from your Bandcamp website, I believe, as well.
I've got some signed copies downstairs still. Well, more copies. So absolutely, that's still available.
And that was your introduction, really, to the music world. You know, your coming out EP, really. And obviously, it was a unique time to do that. So, I mean, looking back now, you know, what was it like for you? You know, was it obviously really frustrating when the pandemic hit, and obviously, but what did you feel the reaction was, you know, to that record? Was it hard to gauge the reaction, perhaps, because of the pandemic?
You know, it was such an interesting time. I think, again, by virtue of the luck of the draw in that I married someone who has you know, an audience already. Fortunately, I married someone who has a kind, generous, and open-minded following. Frank Turner fans tend to be the best people in the world, which is lucky. I was terrified putting that out. I'm always terrified putting things out. There's a theme, right? And that's one of the lyrics. And the fun part actually is I'm terrified. Like, it's really scary because you go, look, this is what I can do. I'm not saying it's better than what anyone else can do, blah, blah, blah. But I was really, really worried and nervous about accusations of nepotism, because it straight up was nepotism, and I claimed that and made the joke, and that's
You
fine.
did,
but I
yeah.
didn't want people to hate me for it. Do you know what I mean? Because so I either do it or I don't. Those are my choices. I either do the thing I've always wanted to do that my husband is helping me do, or I don't. Those are my choices. So I decided to go for it, but I was scared. But I really shouldn't have been, I think, because people, again, I owned that, I claimed the joke. Yeah. So we were on tour. I went on tour with Frank for the first time. We did 2 weeks of tour before the pandemic hit. And they were honestly two of the happiest weeks of my life. We had the most incredible time. The crowds were so welcoming. I think especially once I'd made the joke, they were like, fair enough, you know. But they were so welcoming and so lovely and so open-minded. And I didn't know what I was going to get. I didn't know to expect that. And now it feels like I'm part of this huge extended family within that sort of, for want of a better word, fandom. Do you know what I mean? Within the world. Yeah. Frank Turner Hardcore, because of the live streams as well. So when we called the tour, it was desperately sad, because we were also on tour with Vanessa Jean Speckman and Michael Schnabel, who are like, they're so precious to us, extra precious now after this experience. But it was just a dream of a tour. We were having so much fun, and it was really, really sad to pull the shows. But then we started doing these weekly live streams, which were a poor consolation for real life, obviously. But in terms of people responding to and hearing my music, possibly far more people heard and connected with the stuff that I put out than they would have done otherwise. So I have to be grateful for that. You know, I have to be aware and grateful for that opportunity. And I am, and I'm very grateful for being accepted and not just loathed by those people. But that's one thing, you know, when you're literally stuck in your house and not allowed to leave, no one can call it nepotism, because it's like, well, no other support are allowed in. so that was, kind of took the edge off that a bit. But honestly, I think I worried more than I needed to. And I think people liked it. I think what made me laugh was when people said, oh, I can really hear Frank's influence on the songwriting. I was like, that's funny, because I wrote all of these songs. So I'd never heard of him, but I think people want to see that connection. You know, they draw it together.
No, I think they will. And it's an interesting point you raised. Obviously, with the live streams perhaps giving you a bigger audience than the tour actually did. And it's interesting to chat with you actually, because I was at the last show, the South End show. I was, and I've actually talked.
Wasn't it?
It was, and I actually discussed this with Frank on our other podcast, and the kind of feeling that obviously that he had in the shows leading up to it, and obviously that decision he made during that show, whilst on stage, that he's going home. You know, as a support act, could you feel a change in the atmosphere as the shows progressed, as the tour progressed?
Totally, completely. And it was because I think we kept thinking, because you spend time on the internet and everyone's confused and scared and outraged and horrified. But then we did a show in Bath, and I remember it just being magic still. People hadn't quite got the fear yet. It still felt like it was good. And we didn't want to keep going if it was dangerous, but it was a whole new, we didn't know what on earth we were facing, And I think we started to realize, oh, hang on, this isn't just a cop. You know what I mean? Like, just as slowly as everybody else did, you go, okay, but like some people won't be able to come, and that's a shame, but like, you should never go to a gig when you're ill, because you're spread out anyway, was where we started. And then slowly, over the week, it became, oh no, okay, this is right. Yeah, this is a totally different thing. And I think the audiences also reflected that, the kind of slow dawning of realization across the country of what we were facing. And that one in Southend, people were really respectful, is my memory. I don't know what you remember. I went up front to watch Frank, and people were giving each other space, but then there was quite a lot of space because quite a lot of people hadn't shown up. So I think we kind of realized that people looked a bit scared, and we were getting scared, and it's really hard to pull a show because we didn't know what we were doing or facing. There was no insurance. You have contractual obligations. You've normally, when you pull a show, people are outraged. So you have to kind of rewire your head, you know, to face something we'd never faced before. So yeah, it was, and I think obviously, you know, by virtue, because it was a very much a family tour, we were all talking about it all day, all night, all the crew, and Tree, the tour manager, and Dougie, production manager, who are the real power in that touring community. Frank just does what they tell them. But between us, we all sort of thrashed it out most nights. I remember Frank and I got very drunk and had a row one night because we were so stressed about it, like, and just about chicken nuggets, I think it was, because like, chicken nuggets, the world's ending, you know. So yeah, we definitely, it was a really, really conscious. We were thinking about it a lot, but I really felt it that night for sure.
As you say, everyone was learning together. It was not something anyone had experienced before. And I was actually covering a number of different shows from different artists that week for another publication, actually. Me and the photographer, I think, both turned to each other at the Southend show and kind of said to each other, I think this is it, isn't it? This is the end of music, you know, because as you say, I think we'd seen Frank in that venue a couple of years before, sold out, and this one probably wasn't even 50%, and it was clear, you know, what was happening.
I can't remember if it had sold out. Well, it was much better sold than it was attended. But then you start, that's not something you don't want people to, you know, it's about getting people's money back to them as well. And yeah, it was a kind of retrospectively, part of me wishes we'd worked it out faster. But I also don't, because they were magical shows. You know,
they were.
You have to hope that nobody got very sick at the time. I know you start people from Italy sending messages calling you a murderer and so on and so forth. It's quite a lot to take when you're like, really? I was just doing a show. It's a whole new horrifying world. Exactly.
Obviously a horrible time for everyone. And now we've depressed ourselves by talking about it. Shall we move on to something a bit cheerier? Because live music is actually back. And you will be playing some shows very, very shortly. So you've got, I believe, 1 or 2 headline shows coming up, plus you're going to be supporting the amazing Will Varley on a number of shows as well. So how excited are you to be getting out and playing those shows?
I'm so excited and sort of slightly, because we've done a handful of shows like over the last year. We did Lost Evenings, and then the various shows. I had a couple of nice sort of folky supports, and then I did the Gathering shows with the Extra Mile gang. So it's not our first time back out. But it's the first time back on tour, like properly on tour, and it's I'm going with Laura this time as well, whereas up until recently I'd done most of these shows solo, because she was in shows or because that's just what the offer was or what have you. So it'll be really fun to go out together. I'm a little bit sort of trepidatious, I think, about what it's going to be like, because I feel like things are getting back to normal. They are. But I'm not. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm still doing things. Still feels harder than it used to, and I think that is. I don't know about the shows with Will, but I think across the music industry, there's a lot of rhetoric about how that the numbers still just aren't what they used to be. So I don't quite know, how people are going to feel, but I'm hoping that it's going to be euphoric to be back in a room with people. I mean, certainly I went to a Will Varley show at Union Chapel in January or December. It was cold. I can't remember what time of year it was, and it was just magical. But then a Will Varley show is always magical. Extraordinary. But it was just glorious. So yeah, I'm really hoping that's the vibe. Just going different places as well, being out of my house.
Exactly.
Derby, I can't wait. Like that's going to be really fun.
It will be, and of course, I'm guessing it will possibly be the first live airing for a few of the songs from the album, perhaps. So, how are preparations going for that?
Good. So we're building up this duo show with Laura on keys, which we've not really done live before. She did a bit of keys at one show at Lost Evenings, but she does play piano really well, but she didn't used to sing and play at the same time because she was a classical singer, and so now she's been rehearsing those up, and it adds just a lot to the sound. It really sort of roots it, and there are some songs that you know, just don't quite hit the same if I do them on my own. I Know When You Leave is a good example. Like, I do like singing that song on my own, but it's a different ball game when I get to do it with Laura. And it's different again when people know the songs, you know, even if it's only a handful of people in the crowd. But if there's anyone singing along, that's still, like, that makes me giddy with joy. It's just absurd and wonderful that anyone should know any of my words. So it'll be fun, I think, because some of the songs on the record I've played on live streams, or I've played a bit live, but it's very different when they're out there in the world and people can go and listen to them if they like them, or already know them. Even better. It's still something that gives me a pinch myself. So.
Yeah, no, excellent. And this is the point where I draw fans' attention to your social media channels, because of course if they want to come along to one of the live shows, then they need to find a date they can come to, and the best way these days is to go on social media. So you are on Instagram at Guise Band, and Facebook at Guise the Band. And
Guise the Band, yeah, Guise Band was taken, I think.
Oh, it's terrible.
Whenever that was. Yeah, I don't know who took that, but yeah, a long time ago.
Oh yeah. Well, Twitter is Guise Band as well. So listeners can check them out. And yeah, it's always quite funny when I do this bit, and obviously one stands out as a sort of feminist normally because it's taken by an account with, you know, like one follower. It's
available again, actually, because it was a long time ago and it wasn't a functioning account. It's just someone had claimed it. Yeah,
very frustrating, but obviously it is what it is these days, and that's where listeners need to go, find the tour dates, find a show they can come to. But if they can't make it to a show, you have got a live stream to celebrate the album release on the 29th. So how should listeners tune into that, and what should they expect from it?
So that one, I think we actually are still deciding which, because my Instagram, my personal Instagram, is at Jess.Guise, and that's where I have the most people following me. So we thought we might actually do it there, just because more people are likely to see it. And the live stream is going to be me and Laura, and it's going to be a celebration of the release of the record more than a sort of formal show. So we will be drinking Prosecco, and I hope that's all right with everybody. But it is a Friday night, so it'll be 8 o'clock. But I will post that both on I'll post the details on all our accounts. Probably tomorrow. We're just finalizing how we do the stream. It won't be super high tech, because one thing I've learned over the last year is the higher tech you get, the worse it becomes.
The more issues that arise, for sure.
Honestly, exactly. So it'll just be our phone and us having a gallivant time, but singing some songs.
Yeah, on a Friday night with a few drinks sounds absolutely perfect to me. So listeners need to tune in for that. Obviously, check out the social accounts. It's been a great pleasure talking with you, Jess. The last portion of the podcast, the last question that we have, segment, if you will, is called Setlist Science. And it's just a question of, how much importance do you put into the curation of a set list? And do you have any rules that you tend to follow when building one?
I mean, I think about it a lot. I live with someone who is obsessive about set lists. Frank is dreams about them. I do think about it a lot. For me, because I play in a lot of weird tunings, I used to make up strange tunings. So I have some songs in open C and some songs in Dagad, and some in tunings that people are like, what on earth are you doing to that guitar? And I'm like, I made it up. I don't know. So for me, that's a big thing that I have to think about, is which tuning am I in, and when do I change guitars, or when do I change the tunings? But in general, so apart from that I almost always start with the fun part, because it's just quite a fun introduction to us. So it always feels like a nice way to go. And I'm currently trying to coerce myself off that. It feels like it's a comfort blanket, and I need to stop doing that and do something a bit scarier. But I do think about it an awful lot. It's about having a story and having the good stories in the right spots, and the breathing space, and when do you drop the one that might make a couple of people cry, or when do you make them laugh? I do after 10 years in theatre. I think about it a lot. But I'm often restricted by the mad tunings that I play. No, it's always interesting to get that insight from us, especially where there is uniqueness, as you just say. Again, thank you so much for your time. Obviously, listeners need to head out to a show if they possibly can. They certainly need to check out Youngest Daughter. Obviously, they can do that on all the usual streaming sites, but of course, it'd be nice if they could buy a physical copy as well.
what would be your final message, Jess, for the listeners today?
Ooh, yeah, I hope you like the record. It's really the same thing. I've always desperately wanted to, you know, have, even if it's one person or two people who connect with any songs that I write in the way that I connected with things when I was growing up, and that inspired me to write stuff. So I guess the one thing, I'm not saying there'll be hordes of these people, but if there's anyone out there who does feel like that's them and they've connected it, and anything I've written has ever inspired them, like, let me know, because I would like to know. But yeah, generally I hope you like the record, and
and
call it a show.
Exactly, and they are probably the two most important messages there. So no, thank you again for joining us on the podcast, and all the best with the album release. Well, I really hope you enjoyed that chat there with Guise. Do remember to check out their debut album, Youngest Daughter, coming out on April 29th. And if you can, pop along to one of the shows. Again, follow them on social media. And if you would, do follow us on social media. We are on Facebook at For Pelt, and on Twitter and Instagram at For Pelt Music. Make sure you subscribe to the playlist over on Spotify. And if you would, do subscribe wherever you're watching or listening to the podcast. And we will be back with another episode of the Discovering Music podcast very soon.